How to Create a Glitch Monologues Season 18 Chapter 8. This is Season 18 of How to Create a Glitch in the Matrix Monologues Episode 8. In this episode, we will be talking about the current state of the world from the standpoint of consensual and non-consensual realities. It goes without saying that since the rise of the Internet, the world has changed in many ways. The personalization of one's experience, through directed advertising and content directed based upon one's browsing history, has changed things in a fundamental way. Historically, one's consensual reality was restricted, to a great extent by one's encounters with other individuals in daily life. There was a common consensual framework to our encounters, driven by our interface with the law, common beliefs, and other factors. With the advent of directed advertising and content directed based upon browsing history, we have seen the extension of our consensual reality. In other words, we now exist within a much broader consensual reality, which in many cases conflicts with the consensual realities of our fellow social actors. The result of this extension of our consensual reality is the formation of a non-consensuality based upon dissonant consensualities. In other words, the fragmentation of our common consensuality has produced a reality where dissonant consensuality is the norm rather than the exception. We can now live much of our lives segregated within a consensual framework created by social networking and the Internet. This has produced a fragmentation of the common consensual framework and resulted in the divergence of consensual outgroups. The breakdown in the common consensual framework has produced a reality in which basic assumptions about reality are distinct as between different closed social systems, impairing the ability to maintain any form of dialogue or socially contract in a meaningful way. The result has been a divergence of common expectations about reality and the future. The fragmentation of the common consensual framework means social fragmentation as well, as dissonant non-consensuality generates distinct or segregated outgroups defined by some fundamental views or expectations about what is true. This kind of non-consensuality within a state or social system is deleterious to basic values, conceptions of reality, expectations and ultimately dialogue. The need for a common reality compels the hardening of adherents' views of the other, generating a vacuum which is frequently filled by spatial or archetypal non-consensuality, manifesting as the use of force to compel compliance with expectations. In other words, we are at a state in the development of our society where othering has become microcosmically inherent, not defined or delimited by the dimensions of state or religion, but essential to the fundamental worldview of citizens. This dissonant non-consensuality is antithetical to the operation of a state which is based upon dialogue such as a democratic state. Hence, the movement towards the imposition of a non-consensuality through the state's monopoly on force. We are seeing the rise of fascistic movements, and other force-based compliance movements, to combat the rising fragmentation of our societies. To some extent, the rising fragmentation of consensuality is also the result of dislocation and fragmentation caused by mass immigration and labor mobility. The elimination of the deeper roots for gateways between citizens, common experience which ensures a common understanding of reality, means an uprooting and segregation of populations based upon external characteristics or self-attributed qualities. Fundamentally, people lack the common signposts and common experiential vocabulary to generate common expectations which are required for a common consensuality. Where does it end? The question becomes, what is the result of this dissonant non-consensuality? Can the state function in a culture where people lack a basic vocabulary required for dialogue? I would hesitate to say yes, given that a common consensual framework is required for a dialogue-based state to function. In the end, the rise of fascistic movements may be a symptom rather than a cause. A sign that the vacuum created by dissonant non-consensuality may require the imposition of a more basic, more visceral, form of reality, one that relies upon the violence of non-consensuality. But of course that is not a given. There are other options for the development of our society, such as provided by the example of contractual non-consensuality. Socially, people could be compelled toward compliance with the social contract through the denial of social privileges provided by the state. What is clear is that if we are to retain the democratic flavor of the institutions in democratic countries, we will have to rethink our approach to dissonant non-consensuality. The fragmentation of consensuality through social networking and the Internet is a problem that appears here to stay for at least some time in the future. This means that the fragmentation of consensuality will have to be solved at some point, or we risk the imposition of a martial order through spatial and archetypal non-consensuality, manifesting as a crackdown by the state. If that is to be avoided, there will have to be dialogue, and we appear acerbically resistant to that in a world where we can exist within our consensual framework largely without interruption. That's the end of the podcast for today. If you enjoyed it, please like, comment and subscribe.